My name is Jenny Irvine. I'm from Raise Ventures, and we host these Tech for Non-Tech under the banner of community building and helping educate not just startup founders, but people in the tech industry. As I said, you're all very welcome, and we've got 4 great speakers happening tonight to talk about MVPs, frameworks and languages. And the main reason we picked this topic is because we work predominantly with industry experts that want to build a tech solution. Quite often we have tech experts in the room as well, but those industry experts have a real problem. They want to build something, they know they have a vision about what they want to build, but then when they go and talk to the software developers, they don't quite know what they're asking for. Sometimes, you know, we had a Tech for Non-Tech actually in person, one of our very first events back 2 years ago at Raise, and we had a great discussion around the table that it predominantly comes down to the software developer's preferred platform or preferred language, and that's not necessarily the best platform or language for the startup to build their solution on. So that's really where this topic came from, to give you a bit of background. And we've got 4 great speakers on the call. Do you want to do a quick shout out? Hi Zoe, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much for joining us. We've got Chris as well, and I'm just going to pull up your bios here. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves as we go along, but bear with me. Chris McAtackney, Zoe Gadon-Thompson, we've got Tommy Palmer on the call for the panel. Hi Tommy. And we've got Darren McSorley as well. So we'll just run through and just do a quick introduction, guys, and then we'll get started. Zoe, do you want to say hello and who you are?
Yeah, sure. Zoe, a software developer from Belfast. I moved to Glasgow last November. Really great time to move to a new city. I worked at the BBC up until kind of recently, and before that I worked at Flax and Teal, and I've organised various meetups in Belfast, but since then I've retired and it's great doing nothing.
Good, you're very welcome. Thanks very much for joining. Hi Tommy, how's it going? Give us a quick introduction.
Yeah, so a quick intro for me. Yeah, my name is Tommy. I'm from Belfast. I moved to London in 2013, so it's been quite a while. And I have to admit, it's nice to hear some familiar sounding accents as well. I'm sure Zoe feels the same probably. Yeah, I'm a software engineer. I've been at, as the slide says, GovUK and Deliveroo, and I recently moved to a small company called Good Club, which is like a online environmentally friendly supermarket to do zero waste deliveries. Yeah, I guess that's me.
Thanks very much for joining. Chris, do you want to do a quick intro?
Hi everyone, my name is Chris McAtackney. I'm CTO of Obbi Solutions. I've been working in the software industry for about 15 years as developer, manager, and now CTO. So I have a real interest in product development, product management, and technology, and how all that fits together in an organization. So looking forward to tonight's event and any questions we've got as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Darren, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, I'm Darren. I'm an app developer working here in Belfast. I'm originally from Omagh in County Tyrone, but I've spent the last 10 years making apps up in Belfast.
Super. No, you're all very welcome. And I was just saying to the guys before we opened the call, we much appreciate the panels giving their time to kind of spread their knowledge and expertise with the group. So thanks again. Yeah, we're just going to kick off. It's very informal, guys. Each of the panels guys have a presentation or short slides to chat through about their experience, and they're going to do a bit of an introduction. We'll have questions as they go at the end of each of their presentations, and then obviously at the end a bit more questions and informal discussions. So happy to kick off. We've got Darren up first, and pretty much Darren's background is working at different frameworks and different stacks and trying to kind of bring those expertise to the forefront about his experience and learning. So looking forward to hearing these. I'll just stop sharing. Here we go. We can get started.
Okay, I'll take it from here. Share my screen here now. So what I do in my presentation.
Yep, we can see that well. Looks great.
So okay, you can see me. Everything come through okay, right? So yeah, thanks for that, Jenny. This is Tech for Non-Tech launching MVPs, understanding languages and frameworks. To be honest, I probably should have put a shorter title on that. But hello, yeah, I'm Darren, just was following on from the introduction there. I'm a full stack developer, and this is my opinion. So I'm just going to talk about some of the different frameworks that I've been using the last couple of years and what my feelings on them are. Like, I'm aware, like, as developers, so we can get carried away, so speaking in acronyms and talking about text specs and stacks, and it can all get a wee bit confusing. So I'm going to try and just give a sort of broad overview of some of the sort of frameworks and languages that we use and where you might see them being coming up here. So basically trying to explain why we use them and how we use them. Just a wee sort of word of caution is that I'm a developer, and I sometimes get a bit excited when I'm chatting about JavaScript. So if I talk too fast or get carried away myself, just interrupt, slow me down, and I'll try and bring things back to a wee bit to layman's terms. So yeah, I work at Reflex Studios to produce websites and apps. You know, majority of our clients are in here in Ireland, and started off as just building websites in County Tyrone, and then over time the company sort of evolved here to our studio here where I'm coming from tonight in the Gasworks in Belfast. Michael Malone would be my business partner. He started the company up in 2011, and I joined in 2013. And I suppose it's been a hell of a evolution since 2013. So I just suppose I'm just going to talk through some of the sort of frameworks that we've encountered in that time period. Who we work with, Reflex have experience of working with a wide range of companies over a number of business sectors, and we've delivered stuff for Queen's Radius, Nerve Centre, Super Valley, and Frank and Honest. But yeah, we have a lot of clients. I suppose we've collected a lot over the years, but okay, no, let's move on. So frameworks, we work as I say with a variety of frameworks, and my first role was a PHP developer in 2009. I think back in 2009, I think it was a much simpler time period. You know, if you had a good grounding on HTML and CSS with maybe a bit of jQuery, you were a fairly competent web developer. You know, if you did PHP and MySQL, give you a bit of content management. I think they were sort of the basic technologies that we used 10 years. And I think it was a much more simpler time. But I think as the web has evolved and our expectations of what we want from our websites today has evolved, so I suppose is my day today. So 10 years on, like, I could be jumping in and out of any one of these different frameworks. And that's only a couple of like front end ones that I find that I thought had the nice logos. I'm not even going into the back end stuff or some DevOps stuff that we work on too. So I think at the moment, like, we're constantly jumping in and out of frameworks. Sometimes I think life was just a wee bit simpler when it was this, but expectations change, and we have to adapt with that too. So these are just some of the technologies that we use. And I suppose the question I think an entrepreneur or somebody from the outside of the tech world would ask is, if I just want my idea, I want to try my idea out, or I want to launch an MVP, do I need to use all these frameworks? And I suppose the answer to that is, well, it depends. And I sort of suppose I'll just talk through some of the scenarios that that we have here. So it's like, why use a framework? For rapid prototyping, reduce development costs and time, and provide structure and standards. The idea that all these different frameworks allow you to get up and running pretty quickly. A lot of these frameworks, a lot of apps have similar functionality across platform, and the frameworks have a lot of that functionality built in. So it's easier just to start building on top of framework than start from scratch. So that allows you that sort of rapid prototyping, and that sort of feeds into that second point of it reduces development time and costs. So again, starting from scratch, could take 6 months. Starting from a prototype can have that time, and also it provides structure and standards. And like, I know that if I wrote an app in React, that I can pass that over to another React developer, and they'll be able to work their way around the system and find the system pretty easily. However, you know, if I wrote the Darren framework, I think you'd struggle to be able to pass that over to other people as much as I like that title. So the idea of give you that structure and standards, so that let's say if it's built in React, you can pass that over to other React developers. And there's a wee saying that we sort of say is, if you don't use a framework, you'll end up developing your own by the time you finish your project. And again, that ties into that idea that these frameworks have functionality sort of built into them. And then if we don't start with a framework, then we end up just rewriting the same functionality. So I always think about, the things to consider. And for us, when we're choosing what frameworks to use, I think it always depends on what you're actually trying to deliver. Is it a website? Is it a single page application or a progressive web app? Is it a mobile native app, or is it a desktop app? Does it need server-side rendering? And I suppose I can explain a bit more about that on the next few slides. And does it need content management? 99% of what we do in here would be content management, but what CMS that we use kind of reflects on would depending on what the scope of the project would be. So if you're looking at developing a web app or an SPA or PWA, to use acronyms, you're sort of looking at React, Vue, and Angular. If your app's built in any of these three frameworks, it's got good solid ground. React is from Facebook. It's been going now about, I think, 7-8 years. Probably should double check that. And Vue has been rising in popularity, but it's from the open source community. And Angular is from Google. Like, out of these three frameworks, Angular was the one that I learned first. But when I started going to like network events like this year, I started chatting to other React developers, and I just quickly realized that anything I can do in Angular, I can equally do in React. And I just basically adapted just to keep up with the community. But essentially all these three frameworks, they do the same thing. And it's the idea of rapid prototyping and getting your apps out there very quickly. And the other thing I just wanted to say here too was about service workers. Service workers can add sort of functionality that you would expect to see on a native app. So push notifications or offline browsing, you can use service workers to sort of add them to your app. An example of maybe a framework that would use service workers would be Google Workbox. And I guess it's something to consider if you're getting an SPA or PWA set up. The next one I want to talk about is mobile app frameworks, React Native, NativeScript, and Flutter. React Native is my framework of choice. I've been using React Native now for about 3 years. I first started learning mobile app development back in the sort of painful days of Objective-C and Xcode. And it was something really gut-wrenching as that you finish your app on iPhone to realize that you have to start over again on Android if you want to get it on both stores. I think the big appeal to these mobile app frameworks is that you have one single code base. If I develop in React Native, I can export and have an iPhone app and an Android app, and I have one single code base. And that makes an app a lot easier to manage. If you're writing functionality, you're not writing it twice. When you're testing, you're not testing twice. Even so, if you do develop these once, if you do start the app live with iPhone and Android, just to avoid that repeat development pattern, these frameworks come in handy. So yeah, React Native would be my choice, but I have to be wary of other stuff out there. NativeScript would be more in line with like Vue and Angular type of thinking. So I suppose Vue developers would do the same thing in NativeScript, and it's the same outcome as well with a Android and iOS app. And Flutter, I'm starting to see Flutter come up more and more often now. That's an open source project from Google, and it's the idea of creating iOS and Android apps with rapid prototyping again. So the idea is you can get these apps up and going with very little development time. But yeah, I think it's what apps. Server-side rendering, Next.js and Nuxt.js, where this is probably key is search engine optimization, SEO. Like when I first started seeing apps being developed in React, it was, much as I kind of like the framework, I always had to be wary that they wouldn't perform well in Google. And well, I'm sure I think Google have caught up a wee bit on that. If you use server-side rendering, the HTML becomes perfectly indexable by Google. So Next.js and Nuxt will perform better on Google for that. You don't always need to have SEO optimization for apps. And I don't think I would have said that a couple of years ago, but something we have seen, and like I think the pandemic has also played a role in this, is that companies are looking to get their own internal apps developed, for time tracking or task tracking or something like that. And those sort of apps don't need to perform well in search engines. So you can just roll them out with Vue or React, and that's probably perfectly fine. Where this stuff is needed is if you're public facing and you want your app to perform well on Google, I think you need to be looking at things like Next and Nuxt. Next.js is based on React, and Nuxt would be basically the same as Next.js, only for Vue developers. So yeah, they would give server-side rendering, and that allows your sort of HTML form to be indexed into Google. Content management, Systemic, Craft CMS, Shopify, and WordPress. And Systemic is our sort of weapon of choice here at Reflex Studios. We like the interface. We try to approach things off with like zero training, and not just because we're lazy, but because if it's zero training, that means that it's intuitive to the user. So we know that we build our websites in Systemic, they'll be able to update and manage their content pretty easily without much of a hands-on guide from ourselves. But again, it's had to be aware of other CMSs out there, such as Craft CMS. Both of them would be Laravel-based CMSs. So if your developer was Laravel background, you should be able to pick up them two pretty quickly. And personally, we like to do our e-commerce stuff with Shopify, just because Shopify provides a lot of functionality just out of the box, like discount codes or delivery costs and stuff. And a lot of development is all tied up with Shopify. That saves also a lot of work. And sometimes too, if you want for more complicated integration, you can use the Shopify API and with Systemic. But Shopify does have that flexibility. And I just wanted to mention WordPress there. Like I know as a developer, it can be sort of easy, sort of poo-poo a wee bit over WordPress. But sometimes the budgets, if there's not much budget there and a company just needs to get up and run on the web, WordPress is a perfectly fine content management system, just probably not one that I'd want to use. And then the other thing with content management you start to see become more common is the idea of a headless CMS. The big thing about headless CMS is it allows you to store your content in one place and push to multiple platforms. So that's the idea that we would use this with our React Native apps. If the customer logs in, updates their content on a headless CMS, the content then can be pushed right out to the iOS and Android devices, as well as like a web app as well. So it's the idea that your content can serve up in multiple platforms, and also the idea that you could sort of decouple your front end from your back end. I suppose if I get too technical about that, is that if you're building in a headless CMS, you can use whatever front end technologies that I've just discussed to swap in, swap out, depending on what your personal feeling is, but your content is separated and it's safe and it's in one place. Examples of these would be like the Strappy or Contentful. Contentful can be expensive, but I suppose its big plus points is things like CDN and be able to serve up content pretty quickly. Strappy is open source, which means it's free and you can download that and run that on your own server, which again is always a good option, I think, when you're first getting into this sort of world. Desktop apps with Electron. I put the slide in here. I've actually never developed an app in Electron, but I've seen it, and it's apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which I'm pretty confident I could develop in if the right project came in. But you're starting to see a few more of these pop up now. Like Slack or Visual Studio would be written in Electron. And I'm starting to think this idea and this approach might become a bit more popular. Real-time databases. The guys at work kind of laugh at me sometimes. I get a bit excited about the idea of real-time data and how your app may change and reflect as data changes. Where that might make sense is if you're building like a chat app or an auction website. If somebody outbids you, your phone needs to quickly respond to that. Or a betting website, if somebody scores a goal in football, does that change the odds are on the match? So real-time data databases is, I suppose, a way you would do that. It's something now that I suppose we're aware of, and I think it's going to come in for a few projects soon enough. But I kind of get a bit excited about real time. An example where I've used that before would be in Firebase. Firebase have a whole sort of suite of stuff for apps, and real time databases is one I get a bit excited about. Next one, static site generators. I'm starting to think this might be a wee bit on the scope of this talk, but some examples here are Gatsby, Grissom, and Hugo. Gatsby is a kind of a React-based static site generator. And the idea is that these sites just serve up static content, just raw HTML, CSS. And if you go and check these websites out, the big plus here is performance. These sites load lightning fast. So if performance is a big thing for you, I think I would definitely look into sort of things like Gatsby, Grissom, and Hugo. Say Gatsby is React-based, and Grissom is more Vue.js background, and Hugo, I think Google Go, I think is what was on that. We did a Hugo website a few years ago, and yeah, what I'd say about that is it's just really fast. So I suppose the next question is like, why choose these different frameworks? Why choose one over the other? I think the big point is, I think I sort of mentioned earlier, is the size of the community. if I get my app developed in React, then there's other React developers out there that I know I can pass this over to. Or if we want to recruit internally and take it away maybe from an agency and start managing it internally, I know that I can just recruit React developers. So the size of community, I think, should be a big factor in choosing your framework. Pricing, I mean, a lot of these frameworks are free to use, but some of them can get monthly costs and start adding up when you start scaling up and getting huge traffic. So I'd always just do your research, I suppose, a wee bit on the pricing, that you know that it might be free to set up, but the cost could start growing after that. And then I suppose like go research. I mean, go and start looking up these frameworks and stuff. Often when you go to an agency, they'll have a tech spec in mind, depending on what your project is, but you're learning about these different options, these different alternatives can maybe just help you a wee bit when you're trying to decide what the best approach to go with is. And I don't think I have anything more to add here. I'm going to stay on the chat anyway if anybody has any questions. And I've got a few beers in the fridge from lunchtime that I haven't been able to touch yet, so I wanted to get that talk out of the way first. But look, thanks for listening to me, and I'm sure if you have any questions, shout away, and I suppose I throw it over to the room now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Darren. You know, I think coming from, you know, I'm not technically background, to understand all the different options and all the kind of best recommended or best practice tools and frameworks out there is really, really helpful. And it is, you do need to go out and do your research, but having a few, I guess, best practice names will really help. Hopefully some of the founders on the call and even founders listening to this later on. With a question come through from David, just in terms of kind of what, you know, founder and they're building their MVP. David, do you want to just ask that question there in context?
Yeah, no problem. Brilliant talk, Darren, by the way. It was really cool. So the question was about Flutter. It's just whenever you mentioned Flutter, I think I've seen Flutter mentioned a few times, and the question was sort of, does Flutter use Go as a programming language? But then it was also just on top of that, does from like a founder's perspective, or for someone that's built an MVP and they have an app, is it like is it reasonable to ask the developer that's come into your team to learn your tech stack? Like, say they're a developer and they don't understand Go, but maybe you've built a product and it's based on a language they don't know. Is it reasonable to ask them to skill up in that sort of framework, or are you better trying to say, look, you work on this other project and we'll maybe outsource another developer to come in or something like that? I just want to know your views on that sort of thing.
You know, what I'd say from a developer's perspective is, I'd be happy enough if everything was just built in React and all I had to do was do React all the time, and I'd be content with that. But I suppose from a developer, you can't really stick to that, because, you know, somebody could come into you and say this is built in Vue or this is built in Next, and you sort of have to just adapt and accept that. The one thing I would say there is, if you know one, you'll quickly adapt to the other. They all kind of follow a similar enough principle, and you know, the syntax is very slightly. So the idea that somebody would, I think you said Go there, the idea that somebody would know Go, but there's a good chance they might know Ruby on Rails as well. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask somebody to adapt to that tech stack. I say a lot of these technologies, they do the same thing, but the syntax is just slightly different. So if you know one and know one pretty well, there's a good chance you could adapt to the second one pretty quickly. So that's I think that's the same. It's unreasonable to ask somebody to adapt. I don't think so. I think as a developer, I think you have to be able to adapt. And I think the first question there was, is Flutter based off Go? I actually don't know, is unfortunately the ignorant answer to that one. Flutter, I start to see it pop up quite a bit, and how certain things just happen for me is I see it come up, I know it's on my radar, but until it comes through on a brief, so that's when I start look at what's in the internals and what's under the hood there, and work out how it's worked there. But I always think it sort of has to sit in your radar for a while before you actually have a chance to just sort of play about with it and start installing it and playing about with it.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and that's sort of the same perspective I come at it, where I would encourage any developer to try, and if they're working in a startup and they have the opportunity to work on a product that they want to work on, they could just scale up and sort of learn the technology they need to learn. That's something I'm a big advocate of, and that's a cool answer. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Darren. I really appreciate that. Do you want to stop the share, and we'll see if Zoe's up next. So Zoe has experience in kind of taking on that MVP with maybe, you know, different tech and trying to inherit it, I guess, and challenging of kind of building a remote team as well. So there's lots of Zoe's going to kind of touch on kind of building what kind of Darren said in terms of things to look for. This is kind of the next stage, is having experience and trying to work with that tech stack and inheriting it. So Zoe, you're very welcome.
Okay, I don't actually have any slides, so I'm not sure if you want to show like the intro slide for this event or.
Yeah, no, sure. Happy to just keep it open, see everybody's faces, give everybody a wave.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so it's not going to be super technical, just more of an overview of what my experience has been like over the past, since May. I don't know off the top of my head how long that's been. Generally, as developers, we're really lucky with our skills to have some degree of control over the roles we take. For example, I will work in a bank because I need money, but in general, I like to have autonomy over the work I do, and I like working on products that I believe in, and I don't want to have to ask for permission to try things. I don't think I would survive very long in the corporate life. I've been really fortunate and I've had this freedom in all of my dev jobs so far. And in November in 2019, I moved to Glasgow from Belfast, and I took a 6-month contract and was given a loose promise of getting a permanent job at the BBC. And then COVID happened, and I suddenly had to look for a job in the middle of a global pandemic in a new city and a new tech community that didn't know me. And I was physically cut off from the entire world. And yeah, uncertain and scary times for everybody. Not a good time to look for a job. After about a month, I lost hope, and I was applying for basically everything. My background was mainly a lot of different tech stacks. I'd worked in Python and Vue.js, Laravel, and then I'd spent 6 months working in React, and nowhere was hiring a junior developer with not enough experience in one thing. And then I get a call from Exizent, which were a startup, and they were looking for a .NET developer. I have absolutely no .NET experience, and I still don't think I have much .NET experience and little experience overall, and I had no interest in startups. But this company that decided to interview me was interesting, and it stood out, and it had a clear purpose, which is to make the bereavement process easier for people. It seemed to fit me pretty well because I wanted a job with a purpose, something that would make a societal change, and a company that actually valued the people that work there more than they value making money. The code was honestly the least important decision for me going into this. So I wanted to talk about my experience joining a startup for the first time as a more on the junior side developer. And I want to make it clear this in no way reflects the views of anybody aside from myself. I don't think anybody has, nobody's approved this, so I'm sure it'll be fine. So to add some context about the company, the Exizent platform is an integral part of the bereavement landscape. It's helping to reduce uncertainty, increase speed, and make the process more straightforward for everybody that's involved. By connecting with professionals, institutions, and executors tasked with sorting out the administration involved when someone passes away, we're trying to reduce the burden on those grieving. This is a particularly bad problem right now. My partner's having to go through this with his family, and his family's been told that it can take up to a year to get probate, which is insane, and it's a really difficult thing to have to deal with. And having a single point to process all the information would massively help this, as it reduces the need for constant back and forth between the different parties involved. So it sounds like we're doing a really good thing, and this is something I wanted to be a part of, and it's something that I wanted to happen even if I didn't get this job. And for some reason they did hire me, and I haven't broken anything so far. But this was a brand new company with no culture to try to fit into. There's no hierarchy and nobody to hold myself accountable to aside from the company as a whole. There have been some personality clashes, and we're constantly getting to know people, and we're going through the storming and norming phases. And there's a huge amount of freedom with how we work, and I've never been delegated to do one thing. The priorities change so much, and there hasn't really been an opportunity to get put into a box, which I really do appreciate. It's been a huge learning curve, and I'm not entirely used to it yet. And it's always been clear that I don't need to know everything, which isn't really what I expected from a startup. I was expecting that they'd want like a 10x developer to be able to do everything and know everything, and instead they got me to start with. So the tech stack consists of a .NET API, SQL and document databases, and we have some lambdas doing things like storing files and generating legal forms, and this is going to hurt some people. Razor Pages front end, which is being rebuilt in React for obvious reasons, but this is just the tech stack we inherited, and we've had to work with it. So I joined in May to write code, and in January I moved to the platform team, so I'm doing DevOps now. and I don't miss working in Razor Pages at all. So the initial plan was that we'd work in the Glasgow office, and when we figured out that we didn't really know when it would be safe to go back to whatever normal we can expect, we just went fully remote. So mixing the isolation and the uncertainty with a deadline we had for launching the product, which I think was October or August, it must have been October. So mixing that with difficult code base, a new job, a whole new team of people, and it was just generally really challenging. And I think we all handled it the best we possibly could. I'm still struggling with the isolation, and it is really hard not having the opportunity to bond with coworkers, because we spend all day, almost every day, talking to each other, and we haven't actually met, which is normal for a remote company, but not when you didn't expect it to be a remote company. And after a long day, we don't really want to look at our screens, which unfortunately means we don't want to look at each other. I don't actually know how to deal with this. So if anyone has any tips, then please help. And I'm sorry, I don't have any advice about that. It's just a difficult time. But I do change my expectations frequently, because that's the nature of a startup, where decisions need to be made that ultimately help the business. We could rewrite everything and make an entirely event-driven architecture, and you put everything in microservices and use like React with all the fancy stuff. But that's not the purpose of the company. The purpose is to help people that are going through the bereavement process. Most people don't care what language front end is written in. They don't care if there's divs everywhere that are making a huge mess and look really unsightly. If we have a working monolith, is it worth tearing it down to make something that isn't really going to be any different for the end user? It would actually make the dev process faster and easier over time. But if you're a startup, how do you make that decision? You do what's going to help the business. And that's something that took me a while to understand. I sort of started with like a lot of ideas about how to improve it. And everybody I've seen join after me also has ideas about how to improve it. But ultimately, we work with what we have. And I always forget about that. And I have a lot of people that remind me why I'm actually here. And it's really good to have a mix of a lot of people with a lot of experience, so that there are people that know we're not going to have a job if we don't work on the product. We can rewrite all the code, but if we have no customers, then it's not going to work. And I didn't join for the code, which I also keep reminding myself of. I joined for what we're actually doing. And yeah, to end with, I just wanted to give some unsolicited advice, which I'm sure everybody loves. So these are just some things that have really helped me over the past however many months. I do have one slide. I'm going to share it. It's very off-brand. So I actually took the brand logo off it. Okay, can you see that? Okay, I'm just going to go ahead as if people can see it. So just remember, the framework is just a tool. Don't strive for perfection. That's mainly for developers who join startups for the first time. And for founders, make sure you trust your developers, give them the resources and support and the praise that they need, because it's not an easy job to have. And make sure you support your team through changing expectations, because things will change frequently. It's very agile environment, and communicate as much as you can to people and make sure you're being really transparent. And again, the development framework doesn't matter. Focus on what you can improve, do things that are going to help the business grow, and try to strive for balance between fast delivery and doing interesting tech, because on the other side of that, you're not really going to get developers in if your tech is completely boring. And also, the most important thing is be considerate that these are really difficult times for people, and we're not working remotely. People are potentially working in isolation, and people who are happy in their jobs do good work. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Zoe. It's really interesting to hear the journey into the startup world, particularly, even working your way in. Startups are looking for developers, as you say, they're looking for talent, they're looking to help people grow, and it's great that you're able to step into a job that you're passionate about, as well as you can learn into. So it's a great story. And one of the things, in terms of the team, I'd be interested to know what sort of a size of development team you have in the startup, roughly.
I can't believe I have to think about this.
That's okay.
So the platform team is myself and one other person. So there's 2 of us. The developers, there are, I want to say 5. I might be wrong.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's pretty small. We're bringing in a couple of more developers, I think, very soon.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
lends to
it's
that,
grown
yeah.
pretty quickly.
It lends to that feeling that you have to do more than maybe, as you say, your job description, I guess, and until you start to build a team and start to move into a box in your specialism, I guess it's all about kind of doing what you can for the best of the business. It resonates true.
Yeah.
And I think kind of to your point on kind of the stack is what it is, and you don't want to tear it down today. There's always going to be, I guess you might call that technical debt, and there's never a good time to tear things down and build it better. We've seen some companies try to do that through the pandemic because things have been quiet, but that's a once in a decade opportunity. So it's really challenging to just kind of, as you say, do the best with what you have. So
Yeah,
really,
especially because this is needed kind of now.
yeah, it's fantastic. There's a question come through maybe just in terms of scalability, and you might be able to answer, any of the other panels might be able to answer just in terms of outsourcing, maybe more towards what Darren was talking about in terms of developers and how realistic they are in terms of the scalability. How far do you go down that road of building that MVP with the outsourced, partner before maybe you need to bring it in-house, or can it always be outsourced? Maybe it's something maybe Darren might be able to touch on, or Zoe.
I was the first developer that was hired, and there was an agency that were making the MVP, and they did their job, which was make a thing that would get us funding and that would look good and get customers on board, and it worked. And now we still have it. So yeah, I guess I have no idea when the right time to like bring in an in-house team would be from the beginning.
Yeah, fair point. Any of the other guys in the panel have any thoughts on that before we move on?
My chat is about scaling and feeling. So nicely. No, yeah, there's a lot you could dig into that one. I think it's it's about finding. So I'll talk about it in a minute about finding fit, and whatever it takes to get to that, you find that fit. But that is that's your priority. That's your focus. By hook or by crook, find a product market fit, and then whatever you have to do afterwards, do it.
Brilliant, Chris. Great introduction in terms of leading into the scalability piece. Chris has great experience in terms of being part of a bigger corporation and a scaling company with automated intelligence, and recently moved to Obbi Solutions. So I'm excited to have Chris on board and hear his journey, and in terms of, again, being a lead of a dev team and taking them through that scalability piece. So look forward to the chat. Chris, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I'm just going to share my screen here, 2 seconds. I'm not used to using Zoom. We use Teams, so I'll have to find my way around it.
No worries. Yep, you can see that.
Okay. Okay, well. So yeah, thanks Jenny and David and everybody at Raise for organising the event. As said earlier, I'm Chris McAtackney, CTO at Obbi Solutions, and tonight I'm going to talk about the risks of trying to scale your technology too early as a startup or a new venture. So my talk is scale to fail, or how do you make your toast, which will make more sense in a minute. So I'd like to cover 3 simple enough questions, but they're ones that will hopefully give you some food for thought as you embark on your product journey. So what value are you trying to provide to the market? What are you investing in to support that? And how do you know you're investing in the right tech? So to help us answer these questions, I've enlisted the help of Wallace. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Wallace, he's an eccentric inventor who loves using technology to solve all the problems he encounters in life, problems like making breakfast and, more specifically, making toast. So Wallace wants a nice slice of toast every morning for breakfast. All he needs to satisfy that demand is one single slice of toast. So of course, being the prudent and conservative technologist that he is, Wallace builds a completely bespoke technology delivery system. Massive investment in technology, lots of moving parts, high failure rates, expensive maintenance, and questionable toast quality at the end of the process. So unfortunately, it's a familiar story for a lot of product tech companies. You might hear things at the start like we need to be scalable to be future proof. We need to build our own test framework. We need to be portable to all cloud platforms. And I'm like here to say, as a startup, you do not need to future proof your technology as a startup. It's not the point. And coming, sort of as a tangent from Zoe's point, it's about what is your purpose as an organization? What are you trying to do? Have you proven the model, and have you found the product market fit? So you, and I say you, I mean, I don't just mean you as a non-tech co-founder, I mean you as the team. I mean your technologists and your whoever your sales, marketing, and business partners, whoever's in that team. You're all a team together, and where your collective energy and focus needs to go into is creating a viable business, which is finding that product market fit, something which is supported by a sustainable revenue model. If you build scalable tech too early, you're taking an enormous risk with the investment. You're burning through a lot of capital, creating technology and the infrastructure that underlies that, but you may not have gotten any closer to demonstrating actual business viability. So what I mean by scalable technologies, and these are just some examples. Again, I think Zoe mentioned a few of these. Microservice architectures, auto-scaling Kubernetes clusters, data lakes. These are the kind of buzzwords you might hear. These are hot technologies. And are these bad things? Absolutely not. They're tools, but like any tools, they have a time and they have a place. When you're trying to validate your idea in the market and prove that product market fit, do you want to invest in rapid product iteration, or do you want to invest in complex back-end architecture? One of these things is going to teach you a lot about your customers. The other is going to teach you a lot about AWS's pricing model. So you work out for yourself what you think that the best thing is there. So I'm going to take an example of Zappos, the e-commerce store. Don't know if anybody knows this story, but it's one of my favorite tech company stories. So when these guys were starting out, I think it was about 20 years ago, they wanted to prove market demand first and foremost. So they put up a website that could take orders. That was it. And when an order came in via email or whatever, they literally ran down the street to a shoe shop that was down the street from them, down the block, whatever, bought a pair of shoes, ran back up, packaged them, parceled them, sent them off. Now, they lost money, of course. This isn't a viable business model, but that wasn't the point. They were trying to get insight that there was a demand or a need for convenient shoe purchasing through e-commerce, and they proved that. And then that gave them the evidence that they could go to their investors and they could, to interested parties, and they were able to raise, capital on that. And, at the time, they weren't thinking about scaling technology, but eventually the company grew to be worth $1.2 billion and had a massively sophisticated, scalable technology platform behind the scenes, as one of the world's largest e-commerce platforms. But at the start, when they were looking for that product market fit, it was a couple of guys running down the street, buying shoes and running back up to their flat. So the point here is direct your focus to where it's most impactful to your business, where you are today. You can think, of course, you can think into the future. You can think where you're going to go. You need to have a direction, but you want to be focusing on what's most impactful today. And if you look at your business end to end, you'll probably find there's only one real overall limiting constraint on what you're trying to achieve. And for startups or new ventures, that's most likely to be that product market fit rather than any particular technological innovation. Of course, there's exceptions to to every rule, but this is a real good rule of thumb. So that's where you want to be investing your effort. So now that we've got, let's say we get to that point, we've done our work, we've done our homework, and we've proven some product market fit through some of the techniques and tools that are out there, which I've got some reading recommendations at the end of the chat, which will pop up for everybody. Is now the time to start doubling down on the tech work? Is now the time to start doubling down on scaling the tech and building that tech that you think you know what the market wants? So I'm going to turn to Wallace for a moment. He's going to help us again, and we're going to ask, if you remember, Cassia, you remember back to the first slide of the contraption that he built to make toast. You know, what could he have built instead? Could have built a toaster, yeah. But I don't know if anybody's watched the TED Talk by the guy who built the toaster by himself, but it didn't turn out so well. So what should Wallace do instead of building a toaster? He should buy a toaster. And that's what Amazon's for. So this is a critical point for not just startup companies, but for any tech company or anybody building a product. Are you building something that can be obtained as a commodity from some other source, from other providers, from other software services? For example, are you building a document management system into your product? Are you building an inbuilt messaging system? Are you building your own authentication system? Are any of these things actually your core value proposition? Do any of these things set you apart from the rest of the pack? So instead of sinking all that capital into something that is already available on tap from other sources, look at the available ecosystem around you, look at the services that you can integrate with or build upon or otherwise make use of to create a great product, and ask yourself, what new value are you creating? How much of your investment or your investor's investment is going directly into creating value rather than reinventing the wheel or building things that somebody else has already built and you can buy on demand or as a service. So, and also an important thing if you're building on the cloud platform, which, you know, who isn't these days, consider the evolution and the direction of the technology and what you're building on. How much of your tech investment might be made redundant by the evolution of the cloud platforms in the next year or two? Are you ready for that? Are you thinking ahead? Do you know how you're going to the top of the evolution of that cloud platform to make sure that your entire business proposition doesn't get replaced by a checkbox on AWS somewhere? So focus your attention. So your $1 million question for any startup is, what proportion of your investment is going into non-value adding technology versus the killer stuff that actually differentiates you and your business model, or that achieves, you know, that actually is, as Zoe would have said in her talk, is providing a service to someone, is achieving something for a customer, for a market. We'll go back to Wallace for one last call. You know, he was very innovative, but he invested in a problem that had already been solved and it didn't need the scale that it was built for. So I feel like I'm giving Wallace a hard time here tonight. You know, I'm a technologist too, so don't take it too hard, Wallace, but it's you know, it's all about looking at what are you trying to do. You're trying to build a sustainable business. You're not trying to create technology for technology's sake. And you know, it's something that you have to scrutinize if you're to succeed as a startup venture. So the takeaways then, just to sum up, scale once the demand outpaces the supply. So don't necessarily think we need to be able to handle, you know, 50 million orders or 20 million people simultaneously using our site whenever you haven't got one person who will cough up $10 to subscribe to your service. So feel the pain, then scale. Scrutinize, as I said, scrutinize where you're investing and why. If you're getting frustrated, you know, we haven't got this feature yet. We need this feature onto the market. We need to get this MVP released. And the dev team keep telling me that they're having trouble building the login framework. Why are they doing that? You know, what's going on? You know, focus on what is your unique value proposition, and just buy a toaster. Don't try to do it yourself. So some reading recommendations. These are just some books that I've learned a lot from. I strongly recommend these. Lean Enterprise by Barry O'Reilly and Co. Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perry is fantastic. And this is the more recent book, Sooner, Safer, Happier by Jonathan Smart. These are all great books for tech and non-tech co-founders. because it's not about the technology versus the sales, the business, it's, or the sales side of things. It's about, what do you need to do to create, a viable product market fit, in the most sort of risk-free way you can. And yeah, if you want to get in touch to continue the conversation, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. So yeah, I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, hopefully got some useful takeaways from that, folks. And yeah, that's me. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thinking about the scalability piece, we often talk about the startup world, but that doesn't take long before you actually have to scale, particularly once you've got investment. And I think the real challenge, you say, is that product market fit, getting to the customer and getting evidence. One of the questions there in terms of, when do you think you need to think about, when do you start thinking about scaling? That came from Chris. Chris, do you want to expand on that, Chris Loughlin?
Yeah, I think you can't be, you don't want to be irresponsible with it. You don't be negligent about scale. So if you have some sort of reasonable expectation that you're going to have your plan for the next years, we really need to hit 1,000 users, or we're going to have X amount of customers on the system. Don't use a Excel spreadsheet. Don't be like the COVID tracker system that they used in the mainland. Think ahead, plan ahead, understand what you're doing, where you're going, have a sort of vision for a technology that follows from what you hope the business plan or the business is going to achieve. But you have to balance it with what do we need to do today, because as soon as you stop iterating on the product, you stop learning, and learning is the lifeblood of a startup business. It's not about output. It's not about building things quicker. It's not about building masses and masses of code, having loads of people cracking out code. It's not about that. It's about learning, and you want to learn first and foremost, and then from that you can you end up in a position where you've got the luxury of feeling the pain of not being able to scale. So you can honestly be sensible, be responsible with it. Monitor your usage levels. Do a bit of forecasting and trying. If we do hit this, if we're talking about bringing in X number of customers in the next 3 quarters, whatever it is, actually sit down. Don't wait until don't wait as a tech person or whoever. Don't wait until the whole system falls over, and then the board say, what's happening, what's going on? Say, oh yeah, we didn't scale, because you don't scale as a startup. Use your common sense about it, but monitor, plan ahead, and think ahead. Understand where you're going, and where you hope to go. But do put primarily at that stage, your emphasis, I think, should be on learning about the market rather than the technology.
And I think one came in from Kufa, just in terms of being a non-tech founder. Any insights on maybe your best or first crucial hire? I mean, it's hard to know. I guess it depends who's already on your team, that one. But bearing in mind a couple of different options, you've got an outsourced team and you're trying to bring them in-house, or maybe you've got a co-founder or a friend who's a techie, and they're more likely going to be the software developer build people, I would imagine. So maybe the next crucial hire might be kind of the UX side of things and trying to make it look nice. I guess it depends on the startup, but any insights into crucial hires?
Yeah, the UX one's an interesting one, actually. I think design gets a short shrift in the product world generally, or well, at least here it does, which is a shame, because design is so critical. I'd say like at that first phase, with all I've said, you do need to just build something or whatever it is. You need I think it depends on the context. Like design can be extremely important, and understanding the users, understanding what their needs are, understanding their experience of the system, understanding how they would flow through it, how they would achieve what they want to do with it. So there's at that kind of stage, I think a lot of roles overlap with each other a lot. Like product management. We're talking about good product management here. Good product management and design, stuff like that. And the technology, they're all very much overlapped. It might be the same person doing some of those things. Someone who's just a bit dab-handed at drawing wireframes and things like that might also be one of the developers. So I think at that stage it's do what you can. But yeah, I think building out a team that has, good solid, developers and designers and product management at a certain point is important. It's not just, again, you can't outsource your thinking. So, you have to have that stuff in house. You can't outsource the knowledge of the market or the product to other people. You have to build that internally. How can you make decisions or learn or understand what your business strategy is going to be if everything's been built by somebody else who doesn't understand that? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's totally dependent on the company, but you're right in terms of thinking about your team and building the right people at the right time as well. So no, it's good to kind of think about scale as well as early stage stuff. So next up, we've got Darren in terms of using different frameworks and stacks on a daily basis and having that kind of multitasking view as well. So just trying to give an overall in terms of different use cases here. So Darren, you're very welcome, and it'd be great to hear your chat. David's messaging me and telling me it's Tommy. I'm getting confused because it's 7:30 on the Thursday evening. Apologies.
That's okay.
Yeah, I was panicking there.
One of those days. Tommy's already.
They all look the same, I'm going to say. Some do.
My fault. Recheck. Sorry. Apologies, Tommy. You're very welcome.
That's all right. You can all see that okay?
Yep.
So whenever David asked me to talk at this, I kind of didn't really clock that some slides were encouraged. So last night I very hastily kind of wrote down a lot of thoughts about what I've worked on and how they all worked. So I'll run you through that now. But a little bit about me first. As I said at the start, I'm from Belfast originally, and I moved to London in 2013. It's been a wild ride, and I've worked at some pretty big places, so I'm going to talk about those as well. I'm a University of Ulster grad, IMD, but it's like most kind of university degrees, I'm not sure how much actual use of that I use day to day. I'm a full stack developer, so for those that don't know, that means you're both back end and front end. And let's talk about some work. So when I first moved over, I bounced around a couple of small companies and ended up at gov.uk, which, if you don't know, is information from the government. I presume everyone on the call has probably used it, maybe seen it at least. So gov.uk was interesting because it's set up in like what you see on the site is actually like many different teams and many different applications. So the team that I was on focused on the static information. So like travel advice, stuff around like airplane crash reports, probably a lot of the stuff around the COVID kind of legislation has been published through some of the stuff that I worked on. So what that meant was we had different Ruby on Rails applications that kind of acted as a CMS or multiple CMSs, all published to one central store. And then we had multiple Ruby on Rails apps would read from those and like render that to the user. That was all done with vanilla JavaScript because when you're gov.uk, you can't tell everyone using IE6 that they don't matter anymore. So that was like a really interesting thing to work on. So I stayed at gov.uk for about 2 years, and I worked on quite a few different things there. One of them was like the transition team for the election. So gov.uk had actually been hard coded for the coalition government. And when the next election was coming up, we had to be like, okay, all this hard coded data, let's make it dynamic. Let's introduce more CMSs, that kind of thing. So yeah, after I left there, I went to Deliveroo. I presume most people on the call again have heard, if not used, Deliveroo. You get food by bikes. Sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold. That's how it goes. So Deliveroo, I joined 5 years ago and I recently left. So the difference is quite telling. When I joined, all of the tech org was about 40 people. It was one Ruby on Rails monolith. It had an Angular front end, which I think Darren mentioned earlier. It had an iOS app developed in Objective-C, and it was hosted on Heroku. So anyone who's like used any of these kind of platforms, that might sound very surprising. And it was, because by the time Deliveroo transitioned away from Heroku, we were Heroku's second biggest customer in Europe, and the spend was like millions and millions of pounds a month. So I left there fairly recently. And so this is what the company looked like now and the platform looked like now. So the tech org was more like 250 people. So we kind of moved more into different distributed applications. So Go, Scala, and Ruby on Rails For the kind of high traffic stuff, that tended to be more Go and Scala, whereas Ruby on Rails was stuff that could be lower traffic and we could like iterate and deliver features faster. Most of the web front end, or all of it, sorry, was in React.js front ends, and anything that was customer facing was in Next.js. Now, Darren mentioned this again earlier on, and he mentioned it in relation to being important for SEO, which is most of the reason that it's used for the customer facing bits of Deliveroo. There's also, with React, you've also got this thing called Create React App, which doesn't have the server-side rendering that Darren mentioned. Deliveroo had its own kind of homegrown version of that called Create Deliveroo Tool, which is by and large pretty much the same, but it was more for internal applications. Anything that basically didn't require SEO. We had an iOS app in Objective-C and Swift, and an Android app in Java and Kotlin, and now Deliveroo is hosted on AWS, so it can handle like traffic spikes a lot faster. So yeah, that's the way I kind of left the company fairly recently. And so I recently moved to another company that also does food delivery called Good Club, which is a little bit more environmentally friendly. It focuses on delivering products that are good for the environment and sustainable for the world. So one of the things it does, you can sort of see them there, the little white jars. Delivery actually, or Good Club, sorry, has a load of different types of like, say, grains or dried pasta or dried fruit or whatever. And so they'll ship them to you in these plastic containers and you can just send it all back once you decant it at home. So they're kind of on a mission to kind of make sustainable food available for everyone. So the tech stack with that, the team size, sorry, is about 25 people. So it's much, much smaller. In comparison, so 25 people is the whole company. Delivery, when I left it, was probably about 4,000 or 5,000 people. So Good Club, the tech stack, the backend is an Elixir Phoenix backend. So if you have never heard of Phoenix or Elixir, they're kind of very heavily inspired by Ruby and Rails, but much better place to be able to handle like traffic spikes, and they're kind of a more modern framework for like the kind of connected web. So Phoenix makes it really easy to do kind of real-time stuff. Again, like what Darren spoke about with Firebase. The front end is all in just static HTML, but with Tailwind CSS, which is kind of a very new, modern, and like, I really like it. It's a CSS framework that lets you just like add little classes together. So it doesn't really work the same as like Bootstrap or anything like that. But because we need to get shit done, a lot of the front end is just in jQuery, and we haven't had a chance to kind of go back and clean that up and make it a bit more modern. So that's kind of like my broad career history since moving to London. But I like to make some silly side projects a lot of the time, and I find it to be quite a good creative outlet. And so one that I've worked on a lot this year is Gov Bins. So it literally is just photos of bins. So to give some context, a friend of mine, he also worked at GovUK, and that's how we met. And when he left, he had to work all different parts of the UK, including in Northern Ireland. And so one of the things he kind of found fascinating was the different council logos that he would see on bins as he went around the country. And so he started taking photos of these. He was doing it all himself, and there were like strict rules that only he could take the photos. And in like the start of lockdown last year, we were hanging out, and just before lockdown, sorry. And he asked me like, oh, you know, like it's kind of old, it's clunky, it takes ages to load. Can you please help me with the like development of it? So I basically turned it into a Next.js app with Tailwind, and it's just me and my mate Harry. If you're like dialing into the call, please go and have a look. It's just govbins.uk, because he wants to try and get all of the photos of bins across the UK. Another project that I did a few years ago is what the fuck should I do.in. It's just a sweary travel guide, and it gives you some random results. And a lot of the times I do these projects as kind of a way to experiment. So with GovBins, I wanted to build something fully featured in Tailwind, something that would actually get used. I'd done my portfolio and I'd done a few other things, but like nothing really that people would actually see. And similarly, what the fuck should I do in? I wanted to learn Elixir and Phoenix. So I actually, like, this was over the course of a week. I was like, I'm going to ship this thing. It does one thing. It does it really quickly. And it's just like a nice way, I find, to get used to these kind of like new frameworks. So like I said, it's got an Elixir Phoenix backend. It uses geonames, which is the API that turns the word Belfast into a latitude and longitude. And then it uses that Latin long to search Foursquare, and then gets back some results. And it gives you a random result, and then I just stick something stupid in front of it. So that's how it works. And yeah, it's all in Next.js as well, which I obviously really like. More recently, I worked on a project called Conversations with a Shipwreck, which is a kind of a digital exhibition around a ship called the Vasa, I think, that sank off the coast of Stockholm, maybe, about 400 years ago. And when they pulled it up, they put it in this big museum. And so this artist and photographer got in touch with me, and they wanted to do like a digital exhibition. And so again, that was like another Next.js and Tailwind app, but it was because it was now like a real client. I had another new experience with Tailwind of being like, oh, okay, the client wants it to be exactly this size. I want it to be like whatever size ships with Tailwind. So it was about like kind of getting more and more used to doing that. Yeah, so that's like a quick run through of a bunch of stuff I've worked on over the last few years. Any questions?
I think it's fascinating that we use these big companies, particularly like Deliveroo is one that I was interested just to see in terms of, it's not been running that long, but it still potentially had an older tech stack there, I call it, and moving that across is really interesting. I think as a user, you don't realize the amount of work that goes on in the background of these big companies. So that was really cool. And then, yeah, obviously some comments coming through there in terms of gov.uk, again, a website that probably we use, once a week for information. And, you don't realize the amount of teams that were in behind that. How many teams did you say you thought was behind?
The team that I was on was probably about 70 people across like the whole org. It was maybe like 200 or 300. It's definitely bigger than that now because they moved into like a much bigger office space before COVID.
And it's some of the questions coming through here in terms of, I guess, as thinking of industry founders that aren't tech experts, thinking about building their team and the CTO piece. There was a question came through there from Patrick. Patrick, do you want to jump off and ask that, or if you're still there? Or I'm happy enough to ask it. It's just in regards of sort of sourcing your CTO, any hints and tips on building the team, comments coming through in terms of make sure they have business interests or recommendations, any ideas on how to source a good CTO for our founders on the call?
I would say probably like find people who have been high up in a company, or at least like been at a company for a while. I think it's fairly common for people to like grow with companies like Deliveroo or Monzo, or like those kind of things that have scaled up. And I think it kind of touches on what Chris is saying, because you'll have seen like both sides of that like spectrum of like a company that needs to get stuff shipped very quickly and a company that needs to make sure the stuff shipped still runs.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the main reasons we started these events, is to connect both founders and tech experts. I know there's plenty on the call here of both sides of the table, and even just having a quick virtual coffee, you can get a long way of learning about startups and startups learning about tech. I know I've pulled a couple of you guys into other conversations with some of our startups already, and David's put in a couple of your LinkedIn profiles. I hope you don't mind if anybody wants to connect in and ask further questions. Maybe just quick half-hour coffee goes a long way. Any other questions, guys, coming through for the panel? Happy to open up the chat and see if we've got anything coming through here. David, I know from our team here at Raise is very passionate about no code, so be interested maybe to bring that into the discussion.
Yeah, so it's always an awkward question to ask developers about no code. So it was sort of, I wasn't going to ask it, but then whenever Chris was talking about Sapos and stuff like that, it's very much that sort of Wizard of Oz type thing, where like something we've been encouraging founders to do is just to build no code apps, just to launch it, build it no code, and then get some feedback on it. Just any of the developers, what's your sort of thoughts on no code? Is it something founders should be thinking about, or should they just be hiring a developer and get them to build a MVP?
I don't know about the rest of the panel. I've never built anything in no code, but I get the concept. Has anybody else built anything in it, in any of those frameworks?
Sounds great to not use any code.
I think it's one of those things. It's probably, it'll get you a certain amount of the way, and then as soon as you wanted to do something slightly different, oh right, you know, we can't do this, you know, we have to now go into code, in which case, you know, you're probably rewriting the whole thing again. But I think, you know, it depends on how, you know, it's going to, it's a, you know, cop out answer saying it depends. But I think that, you know, they're great for validating, you know, concepts and ideas. And there's a great book as well. I didn't put it in my slides, but it's Testing Business Ideas by David Bland. He actually did a talk for Product Tank Belfast last night.
Yeah, I tuned into the last half of it actually.
Yeah, it was great. But like, you know, he's all sort of, you know, multitudes of different ideas and experiments and things about, you know, different ways to try it. And I think it's a really, you know, it's a really productive, or it's a really good mindset to get into as a product company, you know, to get out of the idea of, you know, we're a tech company. That means we code and we sell the code, you know, and that's it. That's all we do. You know, there's a whole thing around that, but you know, there's a whole world around that, and validating what you're doing is so important, because there's nothing more sort of demotivating than build something and it turns out nobody wanted this. Well, why do we create this thing? You know, I'm not supposed to this. You know, probably quite depressing as the person who invested in the company, but it's also for the people who were salaried developers as well. Like, it doesn't matter if you got paid for it. If you find out that everything you worked on just went to the side, went to the side of the road, you know, it's not very motivating either. So it's in everybody's interest to make sure you're working on something that's valued and is bringing value to, you know, to other people.
I haven't like worked on this directly, but I know, because I've just joined Good Club recently, but I know for a fact that the first version of the site was actually a Shopify store. And as everything became more and more custom, they just started like interfacing the Shopify API to eventually just move completely off of it. So there's like, it is totally possible. And like, you know, Chris is right, just like getting something done is more important.
And then I think kind of Chris mentioned it as well in terms of, I think it was last year, I saw a stat, there were 7,000 software as a service businesses launched. I think it was across the UK. And just had that stat about, you know, adding value and making sure that, you know, you're solving a real problem, and the collaboration piece. We're seeing a few of our founders kind of buddying up, whether it be supply chain, upflow or downflow, whatever you'd like to call it, to suppliers and customers, and buddying up in terms of being able to sell to these customers, you know, as developers, you know, making your platforms or making your apps as open as possible from that point of view of partnership. You know, what do you think about that? Darren, you know, in terms of agency side of things?
We find ourselves pairing ourselves with a lot of other agencies lately in the last 2-3 years. And I think it's because as the web's evolved, like we find ourselves more sort of geared towards just specializing in front-end technologies. And that's where you start maybe need to pair with an agency that specializes in back-end tech. One of the guys that work next door to us, Laposa, their specialties is in back-end services and being able to scale up and down. And we find that, well, if they do our sort of back-end stuff, allows us to really focus on the front-end stuff. So I started to see it as smaller agencies sort of working together and having their own sort of specialists and own niche. Like another sort of company we work closely in the gasworks here with Double Jump, and specialize in sort of motion graphics and 3D stuff. So we find it, well, if we can lean in their 3D, we can lean Laposa for back-end services, and then we can concentrate on front end. I think it comes together as a much better piece at the end. Yeah, I think the idea of smaller agencies finding their niche and then pairing up with other agencies, it could be something that I think that we're doing more of now as we establish ourselves.
Yeah, that's good to know. Martin, do you have a question there?
Yeah, it's a question coming from a perspective that's from someone who doesn't know anything about coding at all, but has a problem that they need solved through technology and software. And that is, if I'm going to speak to experts like Darren or David or Chris, do I need to use an intermediary first? Do I need to speak to someone who can understand the question on my level so that I can get the wording right or the descriptions right? Or how do I start? What's the first step in understanding what I need or maybe don't need before I waste the time of a deep expert in the subject?
Yeah, I can answer that one. Is that we're a team here. Like, I'm one of the developers. So if you had an idea for an app and you contact us, you wouldn't be talking to me right away. You'd probably talk to one of the people with more of a sales connection or a client relationship manager. They'll probably just talk to you and try to find out what your idea is. And it's up to them to sort of communicate to me to put together the tech spec. You know, if I answered the phone to a sales talk, I'd just end up talking about JavaScript and the person wouldn't follow me and that would go nowhere. So I think in order to sell these ideas and concepts, you need to have someone in your team who's that sort of middleman that can sort of decode what the coders are saying, and then try to work on layman's terms with someone else, or with the customer. Yeah, I don't do sales because I'm not because I just talk technical all the time.
I think as well, Martin, it depends on the type of company, you know, what you're doing and what type of work you're doing. You know, some companies or some business ventures are going to be, you know, the technology side of it is going to be very much a technology company. It's going to be, you know, very, very focused. There's this whole sort of quip went around a couple of years ago, you know, banks and stuff saying we're not a technology company, or sorry, we're not a bank anymore. We're a technology company that sells banking services. I actually kind of think that it's come back the other way now. It's like, no. You are a bank. You're just using technology because that's the best way to get done what you need to get done now. You know, and you know, you've modernized, because if you didn't, all your competitors have. So if you hadn't have modernized, you would have been thrashed. So, you know, if it's a product company, you know, and a small product company, small product venture, you know, I think that the engineers have to understand what you're trying to do as well. So, and that's on, you know, you as like a founder or whatever, and the technologists, you have to have a relationship where you understand each other as well if you're in a small company, because you know, obviously things will change as you get bigger and bigger, and people are going to specialize more, and that's just to be expected. But at certainly small and medium-sized scales of companies, you know, people have to understand what they're doing and what the point of it is. So, you know, I think, you know, I have the chat, see what happens. What's the worst that can happen? Developers don't bite.
We often talk to our founders about drawing it out, craying it out. What do you want it to look like? You know, if it's an app, you know, look at your favorite apps, take some ideas from that, draw it out, see what you want it to look like. If you click here, what should it do? If you click here, what should it do? And that helps inform the developers to what to build. I know Stephen Dunn is one of our Raise companies mentioned earlier. He's a non-tech founder and has outsourced. Stephen, if you're about and you're happy taking off mute, do you want to talk about your process of coming at it as a non-tech founder?
Yeah. Thanks, Jenny. Yes, we're engineers. When I say engineer, people get confused, but I'm an energy consultant who looks at systems for buildings. So we don't know anything about tech. So when we started our new business, Carbon Fit, it was all about grabbing data and crunching the numbers, and we all found that was the hardest bit. So we outsourced, and funny David's mentioned it sort of, and we've sort of built the MVP on non-code just to see how it goes, and we're running with that at the minute, and it's getting good traction. But I know, just listening to this conversation now, if we want to get it better and bigger, we're going to have to make that leap. Hence why I'm on the Raise accelerator and see how we go about that. So, but I suppose I've been in business myself now for 15 years, and I think Chris sort of mentioned it. You know, I'm not starting a tech company. I'm leading a carbon company that gives a good service to our clients, and if tech can help me do that, that's the way to do it. You know, you don't let the tail wag the dog, I think.
Yeah, hopefully that helps. And we've got a wide range of expert, as I say, industry looking to build tech and tech looking to build industry. So Martin, use this network and ask the questions. Any other questions coming in? Yeah. We're getting close to finishing up here. Maybe just a quick roundup from the panels to finish it off. You know, last question, maybe one tip for the guys to go away with a mix in the room here of tech founders, non-tech founders, and even people from industry. You know, one tip going away in terms of languages, frameworks, and MVPs. We'll do a quick round robin if you're all right. Darren, what would be your one tip to go away with?
I think it's also almost like do your research. I know I actually said that in my slides, but I think when you go to a tech company and you have an idea for an app or something, they'll come at you with the tech spec, but I think it does you no harm to actually learn the tech spec, your own idea first, and then pose those questions. So is this a React app? You know, I would like to try it in Next.js and be able to sort of understand a wee bit of those web technologies just before you go in and talk to an agency. And that will give you a sort of better idea of when you're engaging with the company to think if they're in the same lines as what you're thinking as. You know, if you think that their tech spec isn't going to cover your idea. I suppose you'll find that out before you even go and have that conversation with them. So I think, yeah, before you talk to an agency, it's almost like do your research, and can sort of help you then that conversation when it does happen.
Brilliant. And Zoe, as a tech working your way up into the startup industry, any hints and tips for people looking to make the leap or get started?
Find something that you believe in. Don't just go for something because the tech is interesting or it's like in your comfort zone. To go for a product you actually want to support and help work. And like likewise for founders, find developers who you trust and find developers who want to be passionate about what you're doing as opposed to what they're doing. There's a balance.
That's a good tip. I think, you know, to get out of bed in the morning, you have to love what you're doing, and working for a company that kind of resonates with your vision, you know, is very, very important. Chris?
I'm just going to repeat myself and say read some of those books that I put up. Honestly, Lean Enterprise, I couldn't recommend it enough. It's a couple of years old now, but I think some of the stuff, like Stephen, you just mentioned, they're talking about, well, how do we know when we're getting to that, you know, that point where we want, you know, we're going to start to or the hockey stick moment, you know, where we're going to start to grow. It's all covered in there, and you know how to do it. You know how to do that sort of risk-free and responsibly. It's a fantastic book, and Escaping the Build Trap. Again, brilliant. Melissa Perry, product management book, brilliant book. So sorry, my summing up would be learn product management. It's going to be this, you know, the thing that makes your business work. And it's very, 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 very deep and broad subject, but it's not, you know, just jump into it. It's so interesting, and it'll touch on so many parts of the business. So get stuck into that stuff.
And Tommy, from your experiences, any top tips for software developers or founders?
Yeah, I would say if you are using a framework, something off the shelf, don't fight against it, like kind of roll with it. One of the things I saw at Deliveroo was one of the early founders picked Rails, but he didn't really like bits of Rails and tried to like disable them. And that caused us much pain further down the road. And also like what I think it was Chris that said it, like just buy stuff off the shelf. Don't bother building it yourself for the most part.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to all the panel guys this evening. Passing over to David. David's one of our gurus and finding our great speakers and lining them up for our next event. So David, do you want to introduce our next talk for April?
Yeah, so if anyone who's been coming to our talks, you might know Jason from the audience. He's always participating as a member of the audience, and he's renowned in Northern Ireland for being someone who's just really involved with the developer scene. But Jason's main sort of focus has always been on data. So Jason is giving a talk next month called Data is Business, Business is Data. Jason spent, I'm not going to read his full bio here, you can go check it out, but he spent over 30 years in software, and he's been heavily involved with the likes of social tokens and stuff like that. So it's worth checking out. I'll paste the link in our chat here, everyone, as we speak. Also, it's worth noting that we have other events on the Raise website. So if you go to raise.com/events, you can see what we'll actually have various different events, and one of the ones coming up is this remote Raise event. So if you're a startup or if you're an investor, feel free to join and submit your startup to pitch at remote Raise, and it's on the 1st of April, which is April Fool's Day. So feel free to join. That's all for me.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. I guess here at Raise, we do help early stage tech startups essentially commercialize and go to the next level. That's our job, to support the community and support our startups. We've got some of our startups on the call today, and I really appreciate everybody joining in. And if you have ideas for next talks and topics that are of interest, please do let us know. And we'd love to see you at our next events coming up on 1st of April or towards the end of April with Jace. So thank you again to everybody. And as Zoe said, round of applause for all the speakers, so well done, and thank you very much for taking the time out this evening.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thanks everyone, that was really cool.
Jenny, thanks David.
Thank you all.